Welcome to this section where we will take a Razor deep dive while discussing views and layout. In this section, we will be looking at advanced Razor syntaxes that will help us get our job done better. Razor has something called HTML help that is a Razor way of doing some commonly used HTML tags. This has been around for a while and not a new introduction in ASP.NET Core. However, the ASP tag helper is something that has been introduced with the ASP.NET Core. We will look at them both and see how they can accomplish the jobs they are designed to do. We will look into a cool new AJAX-like feature called remote validation without writing any AJAX code ourselves. View components will be discussed to show its modularity nature. We will see how we can do dependency injection directly from a Razor view without ever needing to pass data in a model or view model, making things simpler and cleaner. We will also see the new Pages way of producing HTML from the ASP.NET Core if all we want to do is produce HTML markup pages. So, without any further ado, let's get started with a deep dive into the world of Razor syntaxes. In this video, we will dive into the world of HTML tag helpers. It has been around from the pre-ASP.NET Core era, and its existence is there to add the HTML tags programmatically, rather than writing the HTML markup all by manually typing in. You could let ASP.NET spew out the HTML for you. It has slight advantage over traditional HTML coding, but in certain situations, it can be very powerful. We will look into this in this video. Programming HTML in views with the HTML helpers gives you more like the feeling of Razor programming than HTML programming. It is like calling a function for some HTML tags that will generate the tags for you based on the parameters you provide, so you don't have to type the tags yourself. It spares you from typing an opening and a matching closing HTML tags if that annoys you. The HTML helpers have various overloaded methods that cover almost all scenarios you might need. Your view will end up looking more like C# code than HTML markup code. There are many built-in HTML helpers available. I'm enlisting the most common types here. These are the label helper that generates label tag in HTML, the text box helper that generates input tag in HTML with type equals to text attribute, the text area helper that generates text area tag in HTML, the checkbox helper that generates input tag in HTML with type equals to checkbox attribute, the radio button helper that generates input tag in HTML with type equals to radio attribute, the password helper that generates input tag in HTML with type equals to password attribute, the drop-down list helper that generates select tag in HTML, the hidden helper that generates input tag in HTML with type equals to hidden attribute. You can produce a form tag using the HTML helpers. It starts with the begin form, which produces the form tag in HTML. It ends with the end form, which produces the closing form tag in HTML. It requires the action name and the controller name and the form method to be passed. Form method can be of type get, post, etc. It produces a form block with appropriate action and method attributes. To use a HTML helper, you use it like this. It starts with the Razor @ symbol and follows by the HTML with dot and then the name of the tag. The appropriate parameters then can be passed like the name ID and HTML attributes. Additional values like the HTML attributes can be passed as an anonymous object. When you want to pass the CSS class attribute, it must be prefixed with the @ symbol to avoid the conflict with C# class keyword. There are also the strongly typed HTML helpers for their corresponding built-in HTML helpers. Here is what I mean by corresponding. For the label helper, we have a label for helper. For the text box helper, we have the text box for helper. Notice the pattern. A for suffix is added at the end of the helper to get to its strongly typed counterpart. So, what is a strongly typed helper good for? Well, if you have a strongly typed model passed to the view, then this can bind the data automatically for you. It will also name it appropriately for you. You still can pass additional data like CSS class and any other attribute you wish to add. The power of HTML helpers can really be seen here once you start using these strongly typed helpers. To use a strongly typed HTML helper, you use it like this. It starts with the razor @ symbol and followed by the HTML with dot and then the name of the strongly typed tag helper. No need to pass the parameters like the name, ID, and HTML attributes. But a lambda expression can specify what property of the model this control is being bound to, and in the HTML markup, appropriate name and ID attributes will be added by ASP.NET behind the scene. Additional value, like the HTML attributes, can be passed as an anonymous object. As usual, when you want to pass the CSS class attribute, it must be prefixed with the @ symbol to avoid conflict with the C# class keyword. There are also the HTML helpers for data validation message display. You can set attributes in your model classes for validations. There are many attributes available for this purpose. When error occurs in user data input, and ASP.NET detects that error due to the attributes set in the model class, the model validation will fail, and ASP.NET will generate the appropriate error code based on these validation helpers that you can set in your views. I've discussed validation attributes in the first part of this course. Here is the link for that course should you need to brush up on the basics of validation. We have validation message, which is a loosely typed HTML helper to display an error message for a particular field's input display failure. Validation message for is a strongly typed helper to display an error message like the validation message, again for a particular field's input validation failure. Validation summary will summarize all the errors in one place, nicely formatted. Last but not least, there are two HTML helpers for generating anchor tag and the Href links. The first one is @html.actionLink. The second one is @url.action. We will see them in action next. In this video, we have seen the following helpers. We have seen what HTML helpers are, how to generate different controls like label and text box, etc. using helpers. We have seen how to use form helper to generate the HTML form tag. We have seen the strongly typed helper counterpart of the weakly typed helpers. We have seen the validation message helpers and the anchor tag helpers.